I am recording. Great, good morning. Today we are here to talk more about how to integrate OER into your Canvas. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the course design elements of using assessments within Canvas. I know for a lot of folks who have been using publisher content historically, the publisher content often comes with some sort of external platform where students can complete a lot of their assessments. One thing you will find with many of the zero textbook cost courses is that those platforms are not available. And so there will be a need to start using Canvas for delivering assessments. That doesn't mean that there aren't assessments that are already created out there that you can access. And I'll talk about a few good places to look for that. But one thing, since you're not going to be using something, may not be using, if you elect to go ZTC, you may not be using Pearson or McGraw-Hill or Wiley's platforms that they have. So we'll be using Canvas a little bit more. So our goals for the workshop today, our objectives, is that by the end of this workshop, you will be able to do the following in your Canvas course. You'll be able to create an assessment, create a rubric for that assessment, create a quiz or a survey, depending on your needs, add automated feedback to quiz questions, and create a question bank. So before we actually start on talking about assessments, I want to revisit something that I spoke about in a previous workshop, and that is the concept of using backward design when we develop our courses. And most of us, when we first start teaching, we often think about the lectures, how we're going to fill that class time and deliver as much information as possible to our students. There's actually a better way to do that, or at least a different way to do that, that makes sure that we can design our courses to ensure that students are actually meeting the learning objectives or the learning outcomes for the course. And this is backward design. So the idea with backward design is that you design from the end. What are your outcomes? What is it that you want students to be able to do and to understand by the end of the semester, and then design from that. So the next step after you've identified your outcomes, either course level or unit level outcomes, is to develop the assessments for those. And so that's essentially what we're going to be talking about today, is developing the assessments within Canvas that will evaluate those learning outcomes. And when we think about assessments, we want to think about the level of learning that we are expecting of our students. Now, in the course outline of record for your course are a series of student learning outcomes. And each of those outcomes most likely has action verbs that describe how students will demonstrate that they've mastered this particular outcome. And these action verbs belong often in Bloom's taxonomy. And here in this image, very small, I know, but you can always click on the link and access this from the PowerPoint later on. And these action verbs essentially talk about how students are going to be illustrating or demonstrating their mastery of the objectives. And then depending on the action verb, they kind of fall into these different levels of learning. Lowest levels of learning being like knowledge, recognition, recall, definitions of terms, that kind of stuff. And moving upwards into application, analysis, creation or synthesis, and evaluation. And depending on the level of learning, you may want to select a specific type of assessment to evaluate that. So here's kind of what I'm talking about. This is based on AQ, the Effective Online Teaching Practices course that I completed last year. They had a lot of really great resources. And the one that I keep coming back to over and over is the type of assessment based on the cognitive level or the level of learning. So over on the left side of the screen, you see that there are different levels of learning. This is an opposite direction as what we saw in the previous image. And I just realized that now, so I'm sorry for that. So the lowest level of learning, or the sort of easiest, most basic, would be like remembering something. And as we move up, we see these different action verbs associated with those levels of learning. So if we go to the sort of top levels of learning, evaluation, creation, synthesis, we see that there are these terms that we often think of with regards to like designing a term project or writing a term paper. And some of the stuff that we usually think of as being like stuff that we would put in a multiple choice question, those are the lower levels of learning. Over in the right-hand column on this slide, we see that there are some samples of types of assessments that you could use for each level of learning. So for a learning objective that involves definitions or remembering, recall, identify, list, those are often really good. They can be easily assessed using multiple choice questions or fill in the blank or labeling, that kind of stuff. So that could be, you know, it could be a quiz, I suppose, if you wanted to have a timed assessment. But when we get up into the more complex demonstrations of understanding and of learning, where students are actually applying and analyzing stuff, those types of questions that you typically see on an exam do not actually fall into those categories. And I think that this is where we've been led astray by our education. The universities that we all attended to get our undergraduate or graduate degrees were taught by subject matter experts who didn't have a lot of training in pedagogy. And you know, maybe we don't either. I know I certainly didn't when I started teaching at CRC. I had like almost no training in how to teach. So we often fall back on the traditional forms of assessment that we are most familiar with, right? Exams and papers. And it is really difficult to get at the higher levels of learning with an exam. Okay, so stepping down off of my soapbox now. Let's look at the two types of assessments that we have within Canvas and look at which kind of learning objectives would be most appropriately assessed by those two forms of assessment. So we have assignments and we have quizzes, right? Those are the two major ones that there's also discussions, those are also assessments, but I'm leaving those for a separate workshop, the next workshop, actually. So assignments, we can see there's a wide range of levels of learning here, all the way from some of the most fundamental basic levels of learning up to the higher ones where you're actually creating and synthesizing material. Quizzes, on the other hand, for the most part, hit the kind of two lowest levels of learning, which are knowledge and comprehension. So they have a little bit less flexibility in terms of the type of objectives that you can assess with that. I'm looking in the chat, I don't see any questions. So I'm going to assume that it's safe for me to move on, unless we had any questions about the aligning assessment type with objectives. Okay. So the next step is, how do we know we're making a good assessment, right? An assessment could be in the form of a paper, a project, a quiz, a creative work, all sorts of lab report, all sorts of stuff. But how do we know that we're doing a good job, right? Like, it sounds like a good idea, but how do we know it actually gets at what we want it to get at? So the first thing we want to think about is it authentic? And you may have heard this term authentic assessment thrown around, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what authentic means. Well, there's two ways to look at authenticity in assessments. One is that the assessment aligns with the unit level objectives and or the course level objectives. So if you have an assessment that is to create some code in a computer program that will, produce a given product, then you want to have an assessment where the user is, or the student is actually building code, right? Not evaluating somebody else's code. The other component of authenticity is that in an ideal world, when we have loads and loads of time and grading time limitations don't exist, we want our assessments to actually give students an opportunity for kind of real world application. So, you know, in biology, I could ask my students about the organelles that are found inside of a cell, the things that like keep the cell running and help fuel the cell and take care of waste and all of that. But that's just, you know, that's low level stuff. That's like, can you match this term mitochondria with its definition? Instead, I could provide them with a case study where a person has a particular mutation that interferes with the ability of that organelle to do something. And I could ask the students what they predict the outcome could be of this particular disorder. How will that affect the cells? And so that is a more authentic way of incorporating the understanding of terminology into an assessment where they're actually like applying that information. I hope that makes sense. The other element of making a good assessment is the construction, the actual nuts and bolts of the inner workings of the assessment. And so the things that I typically think of when I'm doing like course design stuff for fast track and aligning classes with the OER rubric, I'm usually looking for specific things. And one of them is that the objectives that are being assessed are included in the instructions or somewhere in the background information of the assignment. And then also there's some kind of context for why students are being asked to complete this specific task. And that can all be achieved in a few simple sentences at the beginning of the assignment. Okay, class, we're going to be completing this case study today because one of the objectives of this module was to blank, and now you're going to do this to show me that you can do that. The next set is clear instructions, right? This is like following a recipe. So make sure that you have all the ingredients there and you have the procedure for how to combine the ingredients to make the final product. So make sure you've got your recipe in your instructions. And then clear expectations. What should students be submitting? Are they only submitting a file, or is it okay for them to submit a video? And if they want to submit a video, how do they do that? And also mixed in with those expectations are rubrics and scoring guides and samples of good work. So I find that I get a lot fewer questions about why my students got a particular grade on an assessment when I include a rubric and clear set of expectations, because they can easily go to look at the rubric before they submit the assignment to make sure that they've met all of the aspects of what I'm looking for when I'm going to assign the grade. So that can really, really help with questions. Another thing that will save you from getting pestered by your students is to include a timeline for when you expect you will be providing them with a grade. And this should be in the assignment instructions rather than in an announcement later. Like, great job, everybody, you turned in your assignment. Now you're going to have to wait a week. Have that right where they're submitting the assignment so they see that, and then they're less likely to bother you about, why haven't I seen my grade yet? And then also information about how the feedback is going to be provided. So if you're going to be providing feedback using the rubric, then you want to make sure that you explain that to the students so that they can actually access the rubric. Because some students don't know what the icons in the gradebook mean. And so we can quickly say, oh, go look at the rubric, but it looks totally different to them. It doesn't look the same as it does for us. And so helping them understand the mechanics of the student side of things and how to access that information is really key to, one, ensuring students are successful in submitting the assignment, but that they can also apply the feedback that you took so much time to provide. There are other help items that you may or may not want to include in your assignment instructions. I always try to include a couple links to Canvas guides, Canvas student guides that will demonstrate how to do particular workflows, like how do I upload a file for my assignment, or how do I pull something from Google Drive into my assignment, because I did it on Google Drive because I don't have Microsoft Office or whatever. So those help items can be really helpful. A lot of this stuff is, there are samples of what assignment instructions could look like in the CRC online course template. I just posted the CRC online course template for spring 2022 and summer 22 in Canvas Commons. So I can share the link with you in the chat, or you can just search for CRC online course template and then select the most recent iteration so that you can see some of those that sample stuff in your own courses. Okay, so if you are starting from scratch and you don't actually have any assessments because you've been using a platform like Mastering or My Math Lab or McGraw-Hill Connect or something like that, then you might want to get some ideas from somewhere. And so I've done some research and I've poked around, and I'm sure Andy has additional ideas because I have a limited breadth of subjects and disciplines where I feel comfortable actually looking for assignments. And so the places that I've found, I've had the most luck finding assignments that would be useful for my classes are OER Commons, Merlot, and Oasis, and then of course Canvas Commons. Canvas Commons, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to access this, but Canvas Commons has like a lot of stuff. So I'm going to actually demonstrate how to locate something used Canvas Commons. So here I am in Canvas, and I am going to locate the icon in the global navigation menu that has little C with an arrow. But I want to actually keep this tab open. So I'm going to right click on that icon and select open in a new tab. So now it's going to open in a new tab. And so here I am in Commons, okay? And so I'm going to do a search for mitosis because I want an assignment on mitosis. And then I can use this filter feature over here to filter for assignments, quizzes. I can also select my grade level, and then you can look in groups if you are a member of any groups. So we've got those. And so now here I have some assignments that I can use. And really, you want to make sure that you preview these to see if they're actually something that you want. So for example, this particular assignment has no instructions. All it has is link. So that's probably not an assignment that I would want to actually use. Some of the other assignments may have slightly more instructions. This one has, these are quiz questions. They don't have much in the way of instructions, but the quiz questions are, they could be pretty useful because it's labeling stuff. We'd want to make sure that this is accessible, make sure these images have alternative text and all of that, but this could be useful. I could possibly use this. And if I wanted to use it, I could import it into my Canvas course. So I select the import download option, and then let's say I want to import it into one of my demo shells. And then I just scroll down to the bottom and select import into course. Then I can go back to my demo shell in Canvas and I'll see it there in the quizzes area. Pretty handy, huh? Okay. So again, when we're looking for assessments either on Canvas Commons or on OER Commons or Merlot, we definitely want to make sure that we're still thinking about, oops, sorry, I need to go back. That we're still thinking about what makes a good assessment. So some of the stuff that you're going to find may not be accessible, meaning that there's no formatting or anything like that. And it may not have very good instructions. Some of that stuff you can fix. And some of that stuff you may not want to bother with it. But it's great to look at these sites for inspiration. In fact, if I can change my share for just a moment, I want to show you something that I found on, I think I found this on OER Commons. No, I found it on Merlot. And so here's one that I found, which I thought was like super clever. This is a genetics problem, and it's, whatever, it may not mean much to you, but it's a great place to start, right? So it's a fun, engaging way for students to practice and demonstrate their understanding of genetics, both simple gene and allele assignment, but then also to solve some problems. And it has problem sets in here. And so this particular, when I run the accessibility checker, it's not actually accessible. It's a disaster, this file, but I can use that and I can convert it into a Canvas assessment. And that's the key. A lot of the stuff that you're going to find on Canvas Commons or in OER Commons or Merlot or any of the other OER repositories, you're probably going to have to do some fiddling with them to make them work for your class, following the guidelines of what makes a good assessment. Okay, so any questions about that? Okay, So let's talk about the two different kinds of assessments that I mentioned earlier. So Canvas has two different kinds of assessments. They have assignments and then they have quizzes. There are discussions as well, but because that is a different area involved in like student-to-student communication, I'm covering that in our workshop that's on December 3rd. So for today, we're going to talk about assignments and quizzes. So assignments are, you can create your own, you can convert your OER assessments that you found, and you can put those in there as well. And there are lots of different options for students to submit. Students can submit a file, they can do a text entry, and a text entry is really, really awesome for students who are using a mobile device for most of their work, because they don't have to use an external application and then figure out how to submit that using the Canvas app. So the text entry feature is really, really great. And I strongly encourage you to use that. And I'll show you how that works. Students can also upload and record media. So they can use the camera on their mobile device from within the student app, and they can record themselves speaking. They can take a photo of a creative work that they've done and upload that. That's a really, really powerful tool. Students can also submit external URLs for a project that they did on the web, like if they built a website or an Adobe Spark presentation, or they created, some, a wiki page. That stuff is also possible. As far as grading goes, assignments, you can attach a rubric, and I strongly encourage you to do so, again, because it helps students understand the expectations and it streamlines grading. I know I was like a very rubric hesitant person for a very long time, but I've since come over to the dark side, and I love rubrics. And then there's also plagiarism detection options. Those really only work with file submission stuff. Andy, do you know, does Turnitin plagiarism detection, does that work on text entry submissions? I'm not sure.
Actually, I don't know either. I have only done it on a Google submission, which changes into a file.
Yeah, okay. So it does work with a Google submission and a file submission, but it may not work with the text entry. We can see. We'll test it out. Okay. So before I actually get to the rubric part, hang on. I want to go in and talk about where we find assignments and how we add them. So okay, so here we are on the homepage of a development or a demo shell that I have, and you'll see that there is an assignments area here, but it's got this little eye with a line through it, which means that students can't see it. So if this is disabled in your course, that's fine. That's actually okay, because that way students can't bypass your content. So one way to ensure that students can access an assignment, and then they can also not skip ahead through the content, then you can add them to the modules. So I'm just going to close some of these things, because these are, so here's my example. We're going to use this. This is a OpenStax course that I pulled off of Canvas Commons. I just did a search for OpenStax, and lots of options came up. Specifically, I don't want their questions. I want the book. So CBC is what I want. But, oh, because I'm looking at quizzes and assignments. Ha ha ha. Changing my filters. Okay, so here are all of the OpenStax stuff. So I just selected one of the OpenStax books that is a CBC OEI approved, and I imported that into my demo shell, and it created all these nice modules for me. But there's no assignments in here. There's just a bunch of links to the reading. So I want to make an assignment. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to select the plus button here across from the module name that I want to add it into. I'm going to select plus, and then I'm going to, from the pull down menu here, I'm going to select add an assignment. So I actually already have an assignment made that I'm going to work with today as a demonstration, but you can also select the create an assignment, and you can put this in here. So this would be our practice assignment for workshop. Okay, so I add an assignment name and I select add item, and that's going to place my new element, an assignment, directly into the module at the end. But I don't want it at the end. I want it like up here right after they do the first introduction part. and it's not published. It doesn't have any instructions. It's just really like bare bones right now, right? This is what it looks like. So this is what we start with. And because you guys don't want to like listen to me typing and entering stuff in, I'm actually going to go back to our module and I'm going to add an assignment that I've already built, which is going to speed things along a little bit in terms of our demonstration, but I'm still going to talk about how I built it and what we want in there. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my chapter 1 module. I'm going to, again, select an assignment, but I'm going to go down here and I'm going to select design an experiment because that's the one I already developed. And I'm going to open that up from the module. And here is the assignment. Okay, so we talked about some of the characteristics of a good assessment. Okay, so if we go back here and what makes a good assessment? All right, so it's authentic. It aligns with unit and or course objectives. So let's see, how did I do? Okay, so I have instructions here. I want them to design an experiment. I want them to answer some questions, and I want them to, and I'm telling them what to turn in, and I've got some help items, but I don't have context. I don't have a reason for why I want students to actually complete this assignment. So I need to add that. I'm going to go into edit. And this is already, this is just stuff that I pasted in from somewhere else. So I'm just going to put a paragraph in here and I'm going to remind myself that later on I need to add an introductory paragraph about why I am asking them to do this and how it aligns with the objectives, right? So for example, one of the objectives of this particular module is to understand, is to be able to recognize the characteristics of a well-designed experiment and identify the different types of variables, controlled, independent, and dependent variables. So I would explain that to the students in this sentence, okay? So if we go back again to the what's good, what makes a good assignment. Oops, we've got clear instructions and clear expectations. So let's see how we did. So we've got instructions. I want them to select one of these and then design an experiment and answer these questions. Okay, so I think I did okay there. I'm looking at this and the accessibility person in me is cringing right now because there's underlined stuff that's not actually accessible because only underlining should be used for links. And in fact, if I ran the, scrolling down here, if I ran the accessibility guide on this, I might get some errors in here for stuff. Okay, we'll worry about that later. Okay, this workshop isn't about accessibility, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Okay, so, and then I have expectations. What are you turning in? A 1-paragraph description of your experiment and the answers. Okay, great. And I give them options. They can upload a document, they can enter it in a text box, or they can select it from the Google Drive tab. Okay. And then I tell them there's a rubric and that they need to submit a text entry assignment. Okay, so let's go down here and let's look at this. So I have this, my submission type options are no submission at all. I'm not sure why we would have that. We want to have a submission option. On paper, well, they're not going to be submitting it to you in person unless this is for an in-person class. And if it's for an in-person class, you can do that. You can put on paper. That'll create a gradebook item, and then students can actually give you a paper version when they meet you in class. That's totally cool. That works. Okay, or an external tool. External tool is when you want students to go and use some kind of linked thing, like a publisher content. We're not going to go there. So we're going to stick with online because our students can either use a text entry option, they can upload a file. I don't want to actually restrict the file types because I'm not going to download these. I'm actually going to use the Canvas Speedgrader to grade. So we don't need to go too far in there. There are other options in here. Submission attempts, you can select how many allowed attempts they have. Whatever happens, Canvas keeps a record of their submissions. And so even if they decide after they've submitted they want to upload a different file, they forgot to add something, they can do that. And you can see the history of those submissions in the gradebook. Here's the plagiarism review. We can choose turn it in, and then there are some options here about how to do this, but we're not going to select that right now because once again, that's not really part of this assessment. And then there are a few other options. You can have a group assignment, which allows students to collaborate on an assignment and submit it as a group and be graded as a group. And then you can also have peer reviews where a student submits the assignment and then Canvas or you will assign a peer review to them. This is really great for English classes where you're having like peer review workshops. This is a great tool there. All right, so I'm going to save this for a moment and I'm going to take a look and see if anything is missing. So here are my assignments. Oops, I lost my mouse. There we go. No, I lost my mouse still. There we go. Okay. And then down at the bottom, oh, it says, I will use the rubric shown below to grade your submission. But I don't have a rubric. This is a problem. Okay. So I can create a rubric. So I can add a rubric and I can create a rubric right here from the criteria that I've identified in the assignment. And so we're going to talk about the characteristics of a good rubric in just a moment, but some things that you may want to do is you may want to do a title for it that aligns with the assessment, because if you do this for all of your assessments, then you're going to have a lot of rubrics floating around in the rubrics area here. And then you want to add at least a couple criteria and then performance ratings. So we'll talk about that in just a moment. You can align this with outcomes. If you've entered in the outcomes for your course, you can actually add all your SLOs to the course and you can add an outcome to your assessment so students can see in the rubric how this aligns with the course level objectives or the course level outcomes. That's huge. It's kind of a pain to set up, but once it's set up, it's really easy to communicate with students how close they are to achieving a certain outcome for the course. You are probably going to want to use this rubric for assignment grading, because that will put the rubric in Speedgrader and it will allow you to provide feedback there. Okay, so I'm going to cancel for just a moment because I want to go back to talk about the characteristics of a good rubric, and then we'll look at one that I already constructed for this assignment. I hope it's still there. Okay. All right, so rubrics. So this is from a slideshow that I came across from a workshop I attended about creating a great rubric. And this was years ago. And I saved the workshop slideshow because I thought it was so awesome. So I've included the link here for the document, and I can place this in chat, maybe not right now. I can place it in chat if you'd like me to add it to there, or you can access it from the presentation notes later on. Anyway, they are the creators of this particular presentation and the book associated with it identify 7 things that are really important for creating a great rubric. And so I'm not going to go into all the details here, but I think that, because we've already talked about this, right? Articulate the rubric's purpose. Well, are you going to use it for grading, or is it just as a guide? And then use your learning outcomes from your module or your course, depending on what kind of assessment this is. And then using those learning outcomes, identify the traits, essentially how they're going to express that they've met that learning outcome. For example, they have adequately described a particular process, or they've evaluated a news source for credibility, or what have you. And then you want to identify and label the performance levels. And I'll show you what that means in just a moment. But we want to try to give there some flexibility, so it's not like all or nothing. There's like a partial credit in there. And then one of the things that I found really helpful was that we want to try to identify and label the performance levels in a way that demonstrates that students are growing and improving as learners. So it's more of an encouraging kind of thing, like so you're using like proficient rather than deficient, if that makes sense. And then each of the traits and each of the criteria would have descriptions, okay? So here's an example of a rubric, and I recognize that this is small, but there are a few things that I wanted to point out to you. So one, I have multiple criteria for my assessment or for my rubric. I asked my students to make a graph, actually 2 graphs, and I have a separate rubric criterion for each of the 2 graphs that they created. And then I have a question about graph interpretation, which was one of the objectives for this particular lab activity. And then I have a variety of performance ratings being full credit, couple versions of partial credit, and then no credit at all. The way that I phrased it, however, indicates that I'm interested in my students' progress, and it also provides them with an opportunity to ask for help. So I particularly like this, I particularly like the trouble constructing your graph one, because I'm basically saying, just as I would in a face-to-face interactive laboratory activity, I'd say, oh, looks like you're having some trouble. How can I help? And so this is the same basic idea, is that we're providing students with an opportunity to, one, get feedback on their work and get points for it, but also giving them an opportunity to continue to grow and develop more skills in this particular area. So that's kind of what that part is all about. Okay, so let's go back to our assignment and let's see if I created a rubric already for this. Man, I feel like I did, but I've got to go hunting through all of my classes that I currently have to see if there's a rubric in here. Oh man, I could have sworn I developed a rubric for this. It looks like I didn't. Okay, so we'll develop a rubric together. All right, so first criterion for this particular thing is, did the students describe, did they include a paragraph description of the experiment, right? That's the first component of this. And I can provide a more detailed thing about the criterion, but that's not actually where I want to include the information. So I'm going to give them a couple of options here. All right. Oops. And so this is going to be, you've got, approaches, standards, you're almost there, that kind of thing. Okay. And this one is going to be full credit. Okay, that's great. So you submitted, forgive my spelling, a one paragraph description of the experiment that adequately represents how a scientific experiment is conducted. Something along those lines. So we want to add specifics, okay? And so this one would be like, okay, you submitted a paragraph, but elements were missing. And I could go into more detail if I wanted to about what's missing. And then no barks would be like, oops, forgot your description. Eeks, right? And so I'd want to do this also for, I'd have another rubric criterion for the questions, like, did you submit all 6 of the questions, right? So I can add a criterion here. This is going to be a new criterion. Actually, no, I want a duplicate because I want to use the same things. And I'm going to change this one to answered questions. And then each of these would be like, you answered all 6. Okay, I'm going to finish with this because I want to make sure that we have time to talk about some other stuff. So create rubric. All right, we've got a rubric. It's incomplete, but it'll work. Let's make sure this is a published assignment. Let's see if I can do this as a student view. It may not work. Ah, it's working. Okay, cool. So here's what a student will see. Here's the assignment. There's instructions about its availability. And then if they wanted to submit it, they could, except for this assignment is locked. So I need to change the due date. So I want to show you the Speedgrader side of things. Getting there. All right, that'll do. Okay. Oh no, that won't do. Aha. There we go. Okay. So now let's try student view. Let's see if I can submit this assignment. Aha, start assignment. So I'm going to start the assignment. And then here are the options. Because I allowed students to do a file upload or a text entry, those two tabs are added. So if I wanted to do the text entry, I could type it right in here, and I could add in formatting, pictures, whatever I wanted to add into that. I'm using the same rich content editor that instructors get to use. So it's really great for students using a mobile device. Or I could choose to upload a file. So if I'm a student, I want to upload a file. I'm going to go to, you probably can't see me navigating here. I honestly don't know if you can, but it's okay if you can. And I'm going to go and find my sample assignment, and I'm going to open it up. I've added it here, and I'm going to click submit. Okay. And so now it says that I've submitted it. And if I want to see my submission details, it will show that I have added this in. Okay. And if I want, as a student, I can see the rubric. And if I, as an instructor, added the comments into the rubric when I was grading it through a Speedgrader, I would be able to view it as a student as well. So that's a pretty cool thing. Any questions about that? So once again, the nice thing about allowing students to, giving students flexibility is that when they use the text entry box or a file upload, they can snap a photo or record a video and answer all their questions. So if, for example, a student just doesn't want to type out all that stuff and you've given them permission, then they can do that. Andy, did you have a question?
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to reiterate how how this seems like kind of a lot of work on the front end, but I can tell you, having done rubrics for all of my assignments, it makes your job so much easier when you're grading. It really, and it sort of takes away some of the bias that you might have, because I think, even, we don't want to admit this, but I think that we might be thinking about each individual student as we're grading something, and if they didn't do something exactly like you thought they would, then you might have some bias there. But when you have very clear criteria to be grading each student, then it becomes a much more level playing field.
And
so that's my 2 cents.
Yes, I appreciate that comment, Andy, because it is true. Creating a rubric is a bit time consuming upfront, but grading is so easy. Like, here I am, and I have I've opened up Speedgrader. I've got the student's assignment in here, and I already noticed that the student they made a mistake here. And so I, in the rubric, can add a comment that says, oops, you mixed up your independent and dependent variables. And then I can add some kind of a hint in there to help my students. And then I can save that. And when a student views the rubric from their end, they will see my comments right there. I don't have to annotate on this. I don't have to download it, and add comments to it or anything like that. I can just use this rubric. It's very accessible for students, and it's very easy, and it really does remove the bias. And it helps ensure that students are, getting the feedback that they need to help them grow as learners. Okay, so if there aren't any questions about assignments, I want to talk in the few minutes that we have remaining about quizzes. So Canvas quizzes are, as you might imagine, they are quizzes, but there's actually a lot of flexibility with regards to how we use quizzes. So once again, you can convert an OER assessment to a quiz, like the one that I showed you with the SpongeBob SquarePants. I could turn that into a quiz quite easily, or you can create your own quiz. So Canvas quizzes are really, really good for low stakes, what we call formative assessments, essentially like helping students check their comprehension on a particular topic before they move on to the next one, or helping students build towards higher levels of learning or more complex projects. They're also really good for things like self-assessments, like if you want students to just like answer a survey about like their progress in the course and where they need help, and you give them a little carrot and like say, okay, if you submit this, I'll give you 5 points or whatever. They're really good for that. And they're also really good for other kind of surveys. Like if you want to know how you're doing as an instructor, you can set up an anonymous survey that students can submit. Canvas quizzes are not really great for summative high stakes assessments, meaning like midterm final exams or even like higher point value exams. Because one, they're generally not going to be authentic, right? They're not giving students that opportunity for real world transfer. And sometimes it's hard to align quiz questions with your higher order thinking objectives, like the synthesis and the application and the creation stuff. You can't really do that so well in a quiz. They are also not secure, meaning that it's difficult to keep students from cheating. I just learned yesterday that Proctorio can be overridden with a $24 piece of hardware that you can purchase off of Amazon. So there's really no way to keep your exam questions secure. Students will, if they're so inclined, they may find a way around that. They're also not equitable, because if a student is not so inclined or doesn't have $24 to spare or doesn't have additional hardware to bypass those test proctoring solutions, then they're placed at a disadvantage to the students who do have either the technical skills or the money. Also, using timed exams, or especially timed quizzes, is that you can't complete them on a mobile device. Canvas quizzes, the way they are now, don't work on mobile devices. So student must access it from a Chromebook or a computer or their web browser on their phone, which can be a little bit difficult when you're doing a timed high stakes assessment. So there are other equity issues associated with Proctorio. Happy to talk about that after the workshop. Okay, so Canvas quiz types, there's lots of options here. I'm not going to run through all of these, but there are graded and ungraded, timed and untimed. There are even, you can create quiz questions with random blocks that pull, like, 8 questions from a 20 question or 50 question random block of questions that you've created. And you can also now add rubrics for essay questions, which is really helpful for providing feedback and giving students an idea of what you're looking for. Okay, so I mentioned already some of the potential Canvas uses for quizzes, or uses for Canvas quizzes, right? So practice quizzes, which are ungraded, students can do them as many times as they want, or pre-checks or comprehension checks, kind of low stakes stuff. And even for untimed assignments where you don't want to deal with a file upload. So that's an option. But again, they don't work so well on mobile devices. So if you're going to do an untimed assignment, it might be better to do it as an assignment rather than an untimed quiz. Okay, so let's see. So Canvas quiz considerations. Okay, so some nice features about Canvas quizzes as far as grading goes is that you can add in automated feedback, and I'll show you what that looks like. And the automated feedback makes grading really fast because Canvas will automatically grade and automatically provide feedback based on what you've plugged in. I will tell you that adding automated feedback to all of your quiz questions can take a lot of time, especially if you have massive blocks of questions that you're pulling from. It's worth it, but it doesn't go quickly, unfortunately. But students really love that feature. You can still end up having to manually grade certain things, like fill in the blank questions, often end up having to be regraded because we can't possibly anticipate all the different ways students can spell a word wrong. And essay questions also require manual grading. So you still may have to go back in there after the fact to update student scores. And you want to make sure you communicate that to your students in the instructions that there's going to be a delay in grading for you to do the manual grading. I already talked about the last 2 bullets there. So let's go into Canvas, and I'm going to show you how to add a quiz and how to edit a quiz and create new characteristics of a quiz. Okay, so once again, we can add a quiz to our module in the same way that we did with an assignment. So we click the little plus button and then we select quiz, and you can either create a quiz or you can use an existing quiz that you've already created in the quizzes area over here. I'm going to, for the sake of time, I'm going to select a quiz that I've already started building so that we can take a look at that. So here's the quiz, and I'm going to open it up so that I can edit it. Okay. And I've set some parameters for this quiz. This quiz does not meet the good assessment instructions thing. So I need to update the context and, why are you doing this quiz? What are you going to demonstrate when you complete this quiz? And then I need to add some more help items in here in case students get hung up while they're taking the quiz. Regardless, I do want to talk about some of the characteristics of this particular quiz some of the things that we can select that I mentioned beforehand. So down below the area here where you add the quiz instructions, you can select characteristics of your quiz. You can select from practice quiz, which is 0 points. And usually that means students can try it multiple times. Graded quiz, and then a graded survey and an ungraded survey. The difference between a graded quiz and a graded survey is that the graded quiz will individually grade each question based on point value and assign a point value based on that. Graded surveys, when a student submits it, they automatically get full credit. It's great for things if you want students to get feedback on something, but you don't particularly care whether they got it right or wrong. They just submitted their journal entry. Then a graded survey could work well for that because it will automatically grade it for the students. Okay, and then I can select whether I want my answers to be shuffled. So it creates different versions, if you will, of the quiz each time students take it, or different A, B, C, and D are shuffled for if you have multiple, if students are taking the quiz together, they can't just talk to each other. Oh, I got A, that kind of thing. You can allow students to see their quiz responses. And if you want them to see the correct answers, you can identify when they can see the correct answers, for example, after the deadline, or only for a short window of time, that sort of thing. There is a feature here for showing one question at a time, but I can show you, I can tell you as a person with anxiety, that's not very friendly. It is one way to make sure that students don't copy the whole exam and post it on Chegg and wait while they're answering the questions to get the answers back. It does work around that, but there's really no way to work around Chegg, to be honest with you. So one question at a time is less student friendly than having them all at the same time. Okay, these access codes and IP address restrictions, I wouldn't worry about that stuff unless you're really trying to do some kind of summative assessment. And once again, we talked about how major high stakes exams, you probably don't want to do that with a quiz anyway on Canvas. Okay, so for questions. So what I've done here in questions is I've added question groups. So each of these is a group that is constructed from a specific question bank. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But let's say I just want to add a new question to the ones that I already have. And so here are all of the options. Okay, so most of these are automatically graded and you can add feedback to them. So let's try just to show you how the automatic feedback works, because I know we're running out of time. I'll just do multiple choice. No, I'll do true, false. Okay, so true or false. Your professor's first name is Jena. All right. So true and false are our options. So I just click on the arrow to identify which is the correct answer, okay? And then the little boxes here correspond to feedback. That's right. Way to go, all right? And if students choose false, it's oops, don't forget to look at my welcome letter, okay? And so now I've added automated feedback to this question. I'm gonna select done for both of those. And so now you can see what students will receive when they answer the question correctly and when they answer the question incorrectly. And I'll click update question. And so now I have that. If you want to see if you have the correct answer marked correctly, you can always select the show question details in here. Okay, so now let's talk about question groups. So I'm just going to save this for a moment because I want to make sure that we don't miss out on the question banks option, which is pretty handy. So I'm going to select quizzes from the course navigation menu. And even if you don't have the quizzes, enabled for students to view, that's okay. You can still access them and you can still access the question banks. So question banks can be accessed from this 3-level VOTS menu in the top of the quizzes area, and you select Manage Question Banks. And so here I've got some question banks in here that I've already created. So let's go in and let's look at the multiple choice one. So here are all the questions that I've already created, and I can show the question details, and you can see that I've already added in the automated feedback for these questions. Not all of them have automated feedback. The further down we go, we see that I lost steam and I gave up on doing the automated feedback. So I clearly need to revisit this before I deliver this quiz. There are options to move questions from one bank to another. You can also bookmark the bank. If you have tons and tons of banks, you can bookmark it so it floats to the top. You can even align a course outcome with this particular question bank, which will help if you want to make sure that you're meeting all of the objectives for that particular assessment. You can organize your questions based on outcome, and when you have them randomly pull, you'll be sure that you get at least one question associated with each outcome in your final quiz. So that's kind of cool. We can also add additional question banks by using the Add Question Bank, okay? And you just create a name and click Enter. I had the hardest time with this because it was like, I'm creating a name and then it's disappearing. You have to actually click Return or Enter in order for it to be created. And then in here, you can add your questions, as many questions as you want. And then when you go back to your, when you go back to your quizzes, then you can select that bank. And so I'm going to go back to quizzes quickly here to show you how we add that bank to this assignment. Okay, so I'm going to go to the questions tab here once I have the quiz opened, edit. And then I'm going to go down here and I'm going to select new question group. And I'm going to select link to a question bank. And I'm going to, this is why we want to bookmark them. I'm going to go look for, oh, here we go, unfiled questions. That's not the one that I did originally, but that'll work just fine. Okay. And then I'm going to name this. So this is going to be OpenStax number 4 or number 3. And I want to select 5 questions with 1 point per question, create the group. So there we go. And it tells me where I'm pulling it from. I don't know if Canvas has fixed this, but what I did discover, unfortunately, was that if I make an update to a Canvas question bank and then don't reset it here in the quiz, it doesn't actually incorporate the new update questions in there. I don't know if it's probably fixed by now. This was like 5 years ago. So hopefully they fixed that problem. And so do we have any questions about adding questions or adding question banks to quizzes? I do want to add one additional plug for one additional thing that you may want to consider is that if you're using an OpenStax book, let's see if I've got access to the stuff now. If you're using an OpenStax book or a Lumen Learning book, or LibreText, you may have access to questions that you can use. Looks like I haven't been verified as an instructor yet, but there are supplemental questions that I can get. So supplemental test items. So I could download these and they would be question banks that I could then import into Canvas and use them for my quizzes if I wanted to. So that is a nice part about using some of the larger producers is that you can access those question banks. But again, just know that all of the question banks are available on the web for students if they look hard enough. So just keep that in mind. Okay. We already talked about Speedgrader with regards to assessments, but I do want to tell you that you can use Speedgrader for Canvas quizzes as well. You can provide additional feedback beyond the automated feedback. And then you can also record feedback via audio or video. And you can do that for any assignment in Speedgrader. So that's really, really helpful. One consideration for Canvas Speedgrader, if the student does a file submission for an assignment, and I forgot to mention this earlier, is that when you annotate on a file, using the SpeedGrader annotations, it is not accessible to students using a screen reader. So those with any sort of visual disability will not be able to access that feedback, which is why the rubric is so darn helpful, because it is accessible. Okay, I did it. Oh my gosh, 1 minute late. Okay, so here's what you learned today. Do you have any questions? And don't forget that we have another workshop coming up the week after Thanksgiving. And this one is going to be on discussion, more on feedback, and on announcements. And I'm going to stop recording.
Thank you, Jena.
Okay, so I'm going to stop my share. I'm going to stop the recording.